1 year ago, I was sitting on an uncomfortable wooden pew in a large, mostly empty sanctuary, smushed between two friends, listening to my rabbi teach on Parshat Ki Tisa, which is now again this week's reading from the Torah. My phone was buzzing with news alerts. Theaters have closed, restaurants have closed, schools have closed, life closing in on us as our world turned inward. Rabbi Timoner was encouraging hope in the face of plague, looking around at each one of our brave few faces, those who dared to come to Shabbat services on the last night before Corona closed it all. She looked around the room as she preached, as she always does on Ki Tisa, and met the eyes of every person in the room, except for mine, because I was looking down at my phone, at my feet, at my fear. I missed one of the last chances I had for real eye contact. I didn't even know it because I was looking down. My head hung down. In Ki Tisa, in this week's Torah portion, we get the story of the golden calf. Moses, who has led the Israelite people out of Egypt, was their only direct connection to God, their only sense of security in this strange new wilderness world, had left to go climb a mountain, promising to be back soon. The people are on their own, they're scared, and they're isolated from the world they knew. And so they look down towards the invisible remnants of their shackles, at their wrists, at their chests, at their ankles. And they notice their gold jewelry. They remove it, melt it, and sculpt it into something new, something they can see while they keep their heads down. Moses, up on the mountain, is in conversation with God. God is up on the mountain, but the Israelites' heads were down. The Israelites were looking down. I learned yesterday from a friend that the word quarantine comes from the Latin, let's hear this, 40 giorni, which literally means 40 days. Thank you. I'm so good at
have your phone for the game.
It literally means 40 days. Apparently it was once assumed that the time needed for isolating and quarantine was 40 days. Just like our Israelites, isolated, heads hung low at the bottom of the mountain in an unfamiliar wilderness, waiting 40 days for Moses to return. I never understood my whole life how in only 40 days the Israelites could lose all their faith in God and in Moses and in themselves and come to worship a small gold calf in such a short period of time. Now, I think I get it. This quarantine has felt like 40 days and another 40 days and another 40 days with a promise of we'll be right back, but no quantifiable end in sight. It feels for me like the God who had led me out of my many Egypts, out of my own hard, low places, out of my own internal shackles. That God has gone up a mountain while I shuffle along each day looking down at my feet. But I have discovered that God, the one who goes up the mountain and stays out of sight, is not the only kind of Jewish God. Our tradition has long understood that God, divinity, spirituality, universe, the Most High, whatever we call it, is bigger than any one image that any of us can imagine. In Kabbalah, in Jewish mysticism, God is imagined as 10 sphirot, 10 aspects of infinitely divine personality, which flow and interact with one another. One of these 10 is a goddess called Shafina. Shafina is divine feminine, the aspect of our eternal one God who looks and behaves kind of like me. She is associated with the moon and with rainbows. Her name comes from the word lishkon, to dwell, meaning she is the God who dwells within us. She is the one who accompanies us in our exiles, in our Egypts, in our shackled places. Shekhinah weeps not for us, but with us in our suffering and holds us tight as we heal. In the Talmud, in Shabbat 12b, we are taught that the Shekhinah dwells just above the head of one who is sick. We are taught that we should never stand behind the bed of someone who is sick, lest we come between them and the Shekhinah. We are taught that we are accompanied throughout our lives by 4 angels. Mimini Michael, Michael on our right, Umismoli Gabriel, Gabriel on our left, Milefanai Oriel, Oriel to our front, Meachorai Raphael, and Raphael behind us. Ve'al Roshi, and above our heads at all time, no matter where we look, whether we gaze up at the mountain or down at our feet, Shekhinah is God's Shekhinah, our divine feminine, right here. Shekhinah is the aspect of Adonai who is always with us. She loves us unconditionally. She weeps with us in our pain and celebrates with us in our joys and our prides. But Shekhinah is most known in our tradition for being the aspect of God who was present with the Israelites as they wandered through the desert. While part of God was up on that mountain out of reach, hiding his face, Shekhinah was above the head of every isolated, lonely, fearful, quarantined Israelite. This Torah portion, Ki Tisa, begins with the census. I know this seems way out of left field from where I was going, but it comes back, I promise. God commanding Moses to count each person and account for each person. The census was taken by collecting a symbolic half-shekel coin, a tiny amount, for each person. No matter how rich or how poor, everyone was counted the same by a single small coin that indicated, I am still here. The command from God came like this. V'yedaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, God spoke to Moses saying, Ki tisa et rosh b'nei Yisrael lifkudehem, when you lift up the head of each person of Israel to account for them. Ki tisa, not if you lift up, if you count, but when you account for them, you do so by lifting up their heads. It's later in the text, it's later in the story that Moses leaves to go up the mountain to converse with God well away from the community. It is later where we find our heads still facing down, looking at our feet, in fear, in shame, in loneliness. We missed the most important part of the command, Ki tisa et rosh, when you lift up your head. The Shekhinah, God's divine feminine loving presence, was right there. She was right there. But we were so distraught, we are so lonely that we forgot. We looked down at the memory of our shackles and forget that she was just right there. All we have to do is lift up our heads, is remember that she is with us, that she supports us and she accompanies us. But we must lift up our heads. We must do the lifting to be counted, to be accounted and accountable. And we will find, if we only lift up our heads, that there she is to carry us home. Shabbat Shalom.